Hello, Nate. What's going on? Nate's got a really interesting one involving, I think, a side pot and a main pot, and thinking that he might beat one guy but lose to the other. What's going on?
Hey, how's it going, Bart?
Good.
All right, this is 2-5 at the Hard Rock in Cincinnati.
2-5 Hard Rock, Cincinnati. Do they still have the Jack at Cincinnati?
The Jack turned into the Hard Rock.
Oh. Okay.
So it started as a horseshoe, turned into a Jack, then turned into a Hard Rock maybe 2 years ago. Okay, we're 1480 effective with the small blind, and I have 2250, and the big blind covers me.
14. So you have 2250, and repeat the stacks once again, real quick.
Okay, the small blind has 1480.
Okay. Uh-huh.
The big blind covers everyone,
All right,
and I have 2250.
Big blind covers. So Hero has 2250, small blind 1480, and the big blind covers. Okay.
All right. So I'm in under the gun +1 and open to 20 with Queen of Hearts, Jack of Hearts. And the button calls and both blinds call.
Okay.
The small blind is
blinds.
Go ahead.
No, I was just saying both blinds call. So you're up against three callers, right?
Right.
Is this the standard open to 20 pretty much?
Yeah, 20. Some people open to 25 at times. So 20 is basically like standard.
Mm-hmm. Bailey is the answer I was looking for. Thank you, guys. Not Lonnie Anderson. Bailey. Thank you. Bailey. WKRP in Cincinnati. All right. So the pot's right just above 80, right?
Yes.
Okay.
All right. And the small blind is an OMC, very nitty. He's basically a rock. He's played one hand and doubled up with ace pre-flop.
Okay.
Big blind is a young, just clicking buttons, doing all kinds of wild stuff. And the buttons, random guy.
Okay.
So, all right. The flop comes out ace of hearts, 9 of clubs, 8 of hearts, and we got about 80 in the pot.
So you flop a combo draw, gutter to a 10, and queen, jack of hearts, right? For the flush draw.
Yes.
Okay.
All right. Small blind checks. Big blind bets $25. I raise to 100. The button folds, and both blinds call.
So this is interesting. So this is going to start off the rails here, Nate. So he leads into you for some basic bullshit bet here, right? This crazy guy. And you raise to 100 because you've got this combo draw. And that raise will get out better hands than yours. Obviously, like most likely a 9 or an 8 isn't going to overcall, but very well somebody in the field might fold like ace-6, right? So this is one of the ones where this isn't, I know you're very, very well versed in Crush Live Poker vernacular, Nate, but I talk about attacking field bettors. I talk about attacking limp pots. This situation doesn't happen as much, but it's the same concept of sort of attacking a leader into the pre-flop raiser. How can a guy lead here? He's usually, when people don't really lead strong hands, which they don't all that much, this is really not a board that he should be leading here, and you can put a ton of pressure on him, and why not do it with a hand that's got a bunch of equity? And I don't know if it will happen these days, but sometimes I've done this before in, older times, and somebody just folds an ace. They're betting to, find out where they're at with like ace 4. Well, you let them know, and then they just show ace 4 when you raise. I've done that before, so I really don't mind the play here. Another thing too, I mean, obviously you've got second nut hearts. If you had smaller hearts, like a smaller combo draw, like say 6-7 of hearts, I think your hand would even be more incentivized to raise to get somebody behind you off of hearts. But normally when I see somebody lead on a sort of a board like this, it's going to be indicative of top pair hand or sort of flush draw. What's interesting though is that you're saying that the OMC here is cold called in the small blind. That's gotta raise some warning bells here, right?
Yeah, that definitely sent the alarm bells off. Part of the reason I raise is because it makes it really hard for the button to call.
Sure.
And the OMC should just muck pretty much anything.
Right? Anything that's really not strong. 2 pair plus, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yep.
So that sent the alarm bells off, and
Yep.
we go to the turn. We've got 380 in the pot, and we get the 5 of diamonds.
So turn is the 5 of diamonds, which brings in 6-7, obviously. Not that that's going to be really all that much represented. Okay.
All right. So they check to me. I tank for a second, and I check back.
Yeah, I think I like that. That OMC cold
Okay.
call, I mean, there's different kinds of OMCs. I think the smart, even though I'm not really a huge fan of slow playing at like a live 2-5 game in general, a smart OMC will understand his image. And if he really is a solid OMC, he should be doing a lot of slow playing in certain situations, because if he breathes on the pot, any decent player should be folding, right? I mean, the adjustment that he should be making is slow playing quite a bit. Obviously, he should be bluffing more too. But when that 5 comes, which is sort of when that small blind cold calls your raise, I don't know how much slow playing he's doing, and then the other guy calls too. It's interesting that the other guy calls too, because you have hearts. You would think like, sort of he'd be leaned towards draws, but you have hearts here. Obviously the king high, he could have the king high heart draw. But I definitely like this check back here for sure.
Okay, cool. The OMC I thought was either on a set, 2 pair, or possibly the nut draw, which I don't think if I bet, I don't think he folds any of that. So
like if he has like king 10 of hearts or something like that, or would he even call with king 9 of hearts in the small blind? I don't even know. Because, you block a lot of these Broadway. If he's an OMC, he's really not going to be able to have many king high heart draws except for king 10, right? Because you've got the other Broadway hearts.
Right, correct.
Okay, so...
All right, so I check back.
Yep, 380 to the river.
And, cool, and we get the 4 of hearts.
Okay, so
you make the flush.
Second nut flush. Okay.
All right. And the OMC checks. The big blind leads for $200. Well, bets $200. And I raise to $750.
So right off, before you get to where we're going here, when I remember when you emailed me this, Nate, obviously I didn't know the background that you gave me about this guy maybe being all over the place, but I looked at this and I was like, wow, this is not an automatic raise here. This is not an automatic raise because when you take a look, and it has to do with the composition of your specific hand here too, because you sort of have the second and the third in your hand, as opposed to like having like queen 10 or queen 9, right? You've got the second and the third in your hand here. And, there should be, there's a fair amount of king high stuff out here, king X combos, especially if this guy was closing the action in the big blind.
Right.
So if he's playing like every king X heart combo, like closing the action, but he's not just playing like any 2 suited cards, and you have queen jack of hearts here, the question then becomes like, what lower hearts, like at what point, like how often is this lower hearts as opposed to king high hearts? I'm just specifically talking about from the big blind, coupled with the fact that if the OMC was slow playing like a set or something like that, if you raise the river, he's never going to call. But if you just call, you might actually get an overcall. So that was kind of what I was thinking here, that this might not be just like a raise it up here to 750. I mean, the big blind, you'd have to really know the situation. Also, the big blind would have to be, if I were to be able to make this raise, I would have to tag the big blind as a guy that cannot bet fold for value. Of course, the reason why is, of course, because like if he has a bluff, it doesn't matter. But there are a lot of guys that cannot bet fold for value, meaning like if they bet in this spot and they have a value hand, they're going to call a raise. But it's not an automatic raise for those reasons.
Yeah, and I get that. The reason I actually raised was because I've watched the big blind use blocker bets a lot, and it was always kind of marginal, and he called off a lot. So I felt like I have a great chance of getting called off by straights, 2 pairs, sets.
Mm-hmm.
even though he seemed very weak when he came in the flop. So I felt like big blind's going to call my 750. The OMC is going to get out of the way.
And you think you have the best hand here that's going to get called more than 50% of the time?
Yes.
I mean, Jack 10 is a misdraw, and you block that. 6-7 is a straight. The question is like, would he bet the flop and would he bet the river when the heart comes with 6-7? Because remember, you raised the flop and then check back the turn. Not that the turn was that, the 6-7 did come in, but that always, even to people who are amateur hand readers, they have to know that you might have a flush draw by doing that, right? Raising flop and checking back turn. Now we know that.
And checking back turn.
We know that you might have. I mean, honestly, I got to tell you, like, if you had ace king here and you raised the flop, which I think is a fine play, you might have played it the same way because you were raising because you wanted to isolate the big blind. You're going to get a much value, and then you have to pull an audible when the OMC cold calls your raise, right? Something changed on the flop. So that's kind of interesting. So, I mean, those are the dynamics. A little interesting spot. Okay, so you make it 750.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And then it really goes off the rails here because the OMC jams
wow. Oh, God.
6-10 on top.
So OMC in the big small blind, right?
Right.
Jams for how much?
Jams for 6-10 more.
So he goes 1360 total?
Yeah.
Ugh. And then what does the big blind do?
The big blind tanks and just calls.
Wow. So this is why I asked you this in the email, because this is going to be a lot of math. So big blind calls. So what is the pot size now, and what's the action that you're faced with?
3,800, 6-10 for me to call, and I also have another 760 behind with the big blind.
Right, and this is where the interesting thing is. So I'm going to ask you a couple questions here, Nate.
Right.
So this has got added depth because Nate has money on the side with this big blind who called the 760. Let's say the big blind called all in, Nate, so that there was no more money left. Would you consider folding here 3,800 for 610?
What was that again, Bart? I'm sorry.
I said, let's imagine that the big blind called all in so that there was no more money behind. Would you consider folding here 3,800 for 610?
I mean, I think I have to call because I'm so at the top of my range and getting such a price.
I mean, you are obviously getting a crazy price, but look at the river action. Raise, raise all in from the OMC on the river as a 3-bet.
I think
it's insanity.
The OMC's got the nuts 95% of the time right here.
Well, if he's got the nuts 95% of the time, you can't call getting 5-1, right? Or 6-1.
Yeah, right. I have to fold. You're right.
It's just it's a crazy, crazy spot. Now, the extra added element to this, though, is the fact that I think where you're coming here is that because you've got because you have 760 behind with the big blind, and this is the whole reason why you raised on the river, you think that you can actually put a bet all in on the side and get called by worse here, right, from the big blind?
Correct. And if I do that, I end up
$150 ahead.
$60 better than I was after I bet the 750.
The only thing that I'll say about this, and it is true that normally, what did the big blind start? Well, he covered everyone, so he's already put in 1360. Yeah, he's put in like a shit ton of money, so I don't think he's going to fold. The only thing that I would say about that, though, Nate, is, and obviously you can't give credit to the big. If I was the big blind in this hand, and I played it this way, I would just call with money behind to try to rope you in. I think. If I had the king high flush and I saw this action, I would not 3-bet the river. You know what I'm saying? Because then that kind of lets you off the hook.
I heavily considered this because I would just call as well if I bet and someone raised me, another guy jammed, and I had the nuts.
Mm-hmm.
I think calling shows more profit than trying to jam and getting the the razor to
right
call all that
exactly
a 4-bet on the river or something.
Right.
Yeah,
So basically you're risking, but here's the other thing that's interesting about this too is that you are risking you have to put in 610 for the call and then another 760, right? To win just 150. So if I'm thinking about this correctly, you're risking 1380 to win 150, right? If you never can win the main pot. This is such a unique scenario, and I'm usually very sharp with this stuff. It looks to me on paper that your options are to fold. Obviously, you can call too, but let's say that it's just, you were going to fold or you were going to say jam. Let's say that you think you're always dead for the main pot. You still are risking 610 to call and 760 on top to only profit 150. So you would have to be right here like 90 to 95% of the time. Maybe that's true, but I don't know if you considered how right you had to be able to risk that much to only profit 150 here at the end.
Yeah, I definitely get what you're saying here because I'm basically getting like 10% ROI on my bet.
Yeah, and people are saying he's definitely not losing to the big blind. So if he's definitely not losing the big blind's always going to call, then yeah, it's probably a profitable shove on the side. But he's got to be right most of the time, though.
And I mean, basically, I boiled it down to what can the OMC have right here that he jammed? Even if he has pocket aces, he's going to be afraid of that, of the hearts. There's no way he jams. So I figure he has me beat, and I go ahead and jam myself, and the big blind calls, and the OMC has king 10 of hearts. So,
and you obviously beat the big blind,
right?
Yeah.
And actually, the big blind had 6-7 of hearts, so it was flush over flush over flush.
Unbelievable. That's crazy. So you did profit by that move on the river, like $150, right?
Right.
Or $160.
But I think in review, I should have definitely just called, even though the big blind's bet was so weak, I should just call because the OMC has to have something strong. And I basically jacked off $350 by raising.
So I just want to read this because I could be wrong here. And this is kind of split pot concepts too. Allison80 says the money in the pot is gone. So he's risking 1,300 or 1,370 in this case to win 680 from the big blind. Right. But we are assuming though that half of that he's never going to win. He doesn't get that back. He actually loses that. It's not like a chop, he's losing 610 and then winning 760, right? That's where I get the 150 from. And this is making the gross assumption that the OMC always has you beat. Like, let's say OMC turned his hand over. Let's say that OMC turned his hand over prematurely and maybe the big blind didn't see it. You know that you can't win, right? So your two options are to fold or to move all in against the big blind on the side. I mean, it's a little bit, but you would know you'd have the best hand. Maybe you imagine you've got maybe the third nuts or something like that, right? Instead of having the second nuts. You're still only profiting though 150 total because he's going to lose the 610, right? Yeah, right. I think I'm right about that. It's a really interesting one there, Nate. But I don't know if you say that you should just call. I mean, if it was between call or fold, I think I might fold, to be honest with you.
No, I feel at the very beginning of the river, you would just fold to the 200.
No. Oh, you say you thought the mistake was raising the river to his 200. I'm sorry. Is that what you said?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, that one's close.
Making that raise was probably my mistake.
That one was that's kind of close. That's kind of close as for the reasons that I stated, but very interesting one. Thank you very much, Nate. As always, I appreciate it.
All right, thanks, Bart.
If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel, and check out the coupon code in the description to try out the Crush Live Poker training site for free.